guys, so now we're getting ready to do the bones. So what I'm going to do, because most of this is just a lot of repetition, I have this handout posted, and if you can print it out in color, great. If you can't, just pull it up on your computer, you know, as you're looking at things. So I also have the bones. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of go through these and talk about them and try to point them out as best I can, you know, on the skull. That's where I'm starting. But anyway, so I'm gonna go through the whole skeleton, you know, in this series, and it might take me a little while, but we'll just start from there. So let's start at the top with the skull. So first thing on page 1. So here we're just talking about bones of the skull. So here we go. This is a skull. All right. The frontal bone, that would be this one. This is the frontal bone. And it goes from here all the way up to this suture line here. So this whole front region, so the frontal bone, forehead. Just think about it as your forehead. All right. Next, you have the parietal bone, which is on the back. And there are 2 of them. So this is a parietal bone and this is a parietal bone. So they're behind the frontal bone, these 2, okay? So right here and right here. This is the parietal bone. Next, the occipital bone. The occipital bone is in the back. So it's this part right in here. So that's the occipital bone. Some of these practice skulls are better than others, but anyway, so here, this is the occipital bone, so think back, just the back of the head there. And now let's talk about the 3 primary sutures that we care about. So there's the coronal suture. Coronal means crown, so the crown of the head. So that's gonna be up here at the top, like where you would wear a crown. So this one here. And if you also think about taking a coronal section, where you cut it in half like this, so coronal section. The sagittal suture is the one down the middle. If you think about back when at the beginning of the semester, we talked about the sagittal plane, where you cut the body in half. This one here that divides the skull connects the 2 parietal bones. And then the lambdoid suture is there in the back. And that would be, it's kind of hard to see on this skull, but it's this one that connects the occipital bone to the 2 parietal bones. And you can see these are all jagged here, so they just kind of fit together like a puzzle. And then as the baby's brain grows, which it grows so much, especially in the first year, particularly the first 2 years though, the skull remains relatively soft, and at these suture areas it's kind of like a growth plate in a way. So it grows, and then as the child's brain gets to an adult size, which is actually very young, then these sutures are going to become bone and be replaced, the cartilage will be replaced. So those are the primary bones, you know, of the skull. We'll get into the facial ones later, but so far so good, not so bad, right? Next, on page 2, this one's going to get a little bit more complicated. So next we have the squamous suture, and it's this one. This is the squamous suture right there. I don't have an easy way to remember it, but yes, this guy at the top, he can literally blow his top. But anyway, so it's under this little clip, so that would be the squamous suture. Also kind of from a side view here, because I'm going with this top picture. I may turn it around some. But next, the zygomatic process, that's this part right in here that's gonna form part of that zygomatic arch. So here's the zygomatic process. And it's gonna be the zygomatic arch when you get into the face. So it's a process. Now, the mandibular fossa this is where the jaw connects to the skull. So I'm gonna get my other head here, and where the skull connects, or the jaw connects, the mandible here will connect right in there. So this here is your mandibular fossa right there. So right where the jaw connects. Again, that's really hard to see in high def, kind of getting that, but there it is. Okay, so now, so look right here. Here's where the jaw connects. So now I'm going to take it away right in here. That would be your mandibular fossa. So it's where the mandible, because this is the mandible, the jaw connects into the skull. Now, the external auditory meatus. This is the part of the skull that where your ear opens. Okay, so there's one on each side. So look on the skull. Where would your ear be? Well, it's gonna be right here. So this here is your external auditory meatus. So right there, that little hole, that's where the sound goes actually into the skull. Next, the styloid process. The styloid process is this, there's one on each side again, this part that's hanging down. So it's in the, we'll put it like this. So there's the styloid process. That's how it's lined up in the picture there. So that's the styloid process. There's the external auditory meatus. All right, now what do I have next? The mastoid region of the temporal bone. Okay, so remember, here's the temporal bone. Right here, temporal bone. All right. The mastoid region is this region down in here. So here's the mastoid region. The mastoid process is this particular part here, and this is where there's a lot of muscles that attach here, just like the styloid process. There's a lot of, this is a good anchoring site for some muscles to attach to bone. So styloid process, mastoid region, right in here. The jugular foramen. Okay, so now we're gonna have to open this. We're gonna look on the bottom. Again, this is really tough to see here, so I'm gonna do my best. All right, let's get close. So this is the bottom of the skull. Looks kind of weird, yeah. Okay, so yeah, I can see that better. All right, ignore this spring. That's kind of annoying. Okay, so the jugular foramen is going to be, make sure I tell you right, these two right here. These two right here in the back. So if you're looking at it, you can barely see it, but they're the ones that go real deep back in here. That's the jugular foramen. That's where the jugular veins go. You'll talk about those in A&P too. Next, you have the internal acoustic meatus. So this is also very, very difficult to see. So the easiest way that I know to find it is you find your external meatus, and you kind of use your imagination and follow it all the way in. And there's this tiny little, it's not really even much of a hole, but that tiny little pinpoint process right there, that's your internal auditory meatus, and that's where the auditory nerve comes. So it goes from the outside, and you just kind of try to follow it to the tiny little area on the inside. So that tiny little piece right there, that little hole. Next, the maxilla bone. All right, so the maxilla here, now we're gonna get into the face a little bit. So here we are in the face. All right, so the maxilla, make sure I tell you this right, is kind of the front of the face here. So this here is the maxilla. He's missing a tooth. Must be a hockey player. All right, so here's the maxilla, or from the side view, this is the maxilla. Next, the zygomatic bones. This is like the cheek. So here is the zygomatic process, and it forms a zygomatic bone. This right here, right under the eyes. Very hard. You can usually touch it on your face. So right here. So these are the cheekbones. Like if you're a female, is where you would apply blush on makeup. Next, the nasal bone. The nasal bone, that's this part up here. So when you have, you break your nose, it's what happens up here. So this is the nasal bone right there. And you can kind of see here, there's a suture on each side. So there's the nasal bone. All right, the lacrimal bone. Lacrimal has to do with tears and the tear sac. So that means we're gonna be near the eyes. So let's find the eye region here of the skull. And now the lacrimal bone is this actual bone right in here. So there's the bone. Again, tough to see. So you can see, follow where the sutures are right there. That's the lacrimal bone. And then there's a lacrimal fossa right there. There's a little hole, and that's where the tear duct drains, because it drains down. So you know when you cry, it makes your nose run. That's actually tears coming out of your nose. Nice visual picture there. So there's the lacrimal fossa there. Now, the inferior nasal concha. It's a fun word to say. Okay, so look straight at it. And do you see these ridges here inside? There's two of them. There's a top one and a bottom one. The inferior one is the bottom. So that would be this one here. Let's see if I can point that. Kind of hard to do this backwards. So there it is. That's the inferior one. So you find the, not a good view either. All right, yeah, so you find the, you can look in there, you can see that there's the top ones and the bottom ones, the inferior ones, those are the bottom ones. Okay, and then the carotid canal, we got to flip back over here. So remember I told you that these two huge parts are for the jugular veins. The carotids actually run parallel in their arteries, so they're actually these holes that are right in front. So here, the big one is the jugular, and then the one that's right in front of it, that's the internal carotid. So you kind of have to tilt it a little bit. So, and then on this side, here's the jugular, and then right in front of it is the carotid. And then, you know, there's a lot of little wormholes here, so you kind of have to be careful depending on, you know, your view. All right, so that takes care of the first two pages.